Good day, random person that I just met. The Democrats just passed the Inflation Reduction Act.
You have no idea what that means, do you?
Absolutely not.
So if you feel identified by the last person in the last video, you're not alone. The Inflation Reduction Act is a very misleading term for a bill that very few people actually understand. I'm going to run you through it right after this segment. Hello everyone, my name is Luis and this is Luis Discusses Everything, where we discuss politics-related news and other topics that affect day-to-day life of everyday people. Now, if you like what you see, smash that like button in the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with friends and family. Also, turn on that YouTube notification button for more videos like this. Now, when it comes to the Inflation Reduction Act, what is it? The Inflation Reduction Act is essentially the remnants of Build Back Better. You remember that? That died way back in 2021 when Joe Manchin refused to vote in favor of the bill. Now, during this whole time, the public was thinking that maybe the bill was going to fail or it was already dead. But then, lo and behold, a couple weeks prior, Joe Manchin and Schumer were actively negotiating on the bill during this whole time. So actually, even though people thought that the bill was dead, Manchin and Schumer were actually negotiating on behalf of everybody else in the Democratic caucus. That means then during this whole time, they were deliberating the details of the bill. So we basically know that. We know that Manchin and Schumer were negotiating the bill. Now, what was the final product of the bill? Well, I'll show you. I'll go detail by detail as to what's exactly in the bill, and I'll place a couple images across the video on this left-hand corner of the screen so you can see kind of like the details associated to that and specific evidence surrounding the bill. Now, the source that I'm going to use mainly is called NPR News, and I think it's pretty reputable considering, but most news outlets have the same information. What you're going to see in the news is that they're going to tell you, oh, the Democrat bill or the climate bill, climate tax bill. Some of those news outlets are correct, others aren't, I would say, in my opinion, because they don't tell you the whole scope of the bill, right? These were the remnants of Build Back Better. In Build Back Better bill, there was a series of priorities for the Biden administration. One of them was climate. The other one was taxes. There was another one that was surrounded infrastructure that passed separately in the Senate last year. And another one surrounding more the aspect of healthcare, right? Out of all those things that were in the Build Back Better bill, what actually passed was a provision for healthcare, a provision for taxes, and a provision for climate. Obviously, not everything that was in Build Back Better actually passed in this bill over here. Now, because Build Back Better effectively died last year, they couldn't really call it Build Back Better. And Democrats understood that they needed some sort of strategy to win in the midterms. So they changed the branding around it. This was actually more of the idea of Joe Manchin, and called it the Anti-Inflation Bill, right? Or the Anti-Inflation Act. Because inflation is so high right now, calling it the Anti-Inflation Act actually would make the public believe that this is actually reducing inflation. And it does reduce inflation to a certain extent, right? But in reality, this is more like ticket items that were on the Build Back Better bill. It was essentially what Manchin and Sinema would agree to that was left out of the Build Back Better bill, right? So I'm going to go in detail through each and every one of those provisions. For context, the Build Back Better bill was around $3 trillion, if I'm not mistaken. And this bill is just shy around, I think it's around $400 billion, right? So according to NPR News, I'm reading this news article that's titled Democrats Pass a Major Climate, Health, and Tax Bill. So the bill includes a historic measure that allows the federal health secretary to negotiate the prices of certain expensive drugs each year for Medicare. So in the original bill, Joe Biden wanted to include a provision that would allow Medicare to negotiate all drugs on behalf of Medicare recipients, right? This was pared down by Manchin and Sinema to only include certain drugs, right? So that means if you're a Medicare recipient, which I'm 31, so I'm not, so I won't be benefited. But let's say you're 65 plus and you're enjoying the benefits of Medicare. What that means is that if there's a certain drug that is included in this list that you're taking, let's say you're taking a specific type of insulin that such and such pharmaceutical corporation has no problem reducing the price of, that specific insulin will go down in price. Let's say it's going for $700 a shot, right? Or a dose, $700 a dose. Well, Medicare can go to the pharmaceutical company and say, hey, that's way too high. Can you lower the cost? And they'll go back and forth, and let's say it goes down to $350, half of that, right? Then you have a substantial benefit on that specific drug that was negotiated with Medicare. Now, the problem with that is not only is it a low amount of prescription drugs, it's also like that also incentivizes like pharmaceutical corporations to raise the prices on other drugs, because according to them, obviously they're getting lower profit on that specific drug that they counted on, and now they're going to have to quote unquote raise prices on the other drugs. So if they lowered, on this hypothetical scenario, if they lowered the cost on that specific insulin to half of its price, then they're probably going to jack up the price of another drug, let's say Tylenol or some other drug, right? But this won't impact every prescription drug, like I mentioned earlier, or every patient. It won't take effect quickly. The negotiations will take effect for 10 drugs covered by Medicare in 2026, increasing to 20 drugs in 2029. So it won't even take effect immediately. It will take effect by 2026, so 3 years from now, and by 2029. So even if they tout this, the Democrats, even if they tout this as like a huge victory, right? The effects of this bill, at least the prescription drug portion of the bill, won't even take effect until at least 3 years after, and another 3 years after, so 6 years in total for it to take full effect, and it will only affect 20 drugs, right? And it will probably be essentially whatever the pharmaceutical companies want to pick. So that's one side of the prescription drug element of the anti-inflation bill, or the Inflation Reduction Act, excuse me. Okay, another big important segment that will affect the common citizen of the United States is that the bill puts a cap of $2,000 out-of-pocket prescription drugs drug costs for people on Medicare, effective in 2025. So again, something that doesn't take effect until 2025, conveniently the year in which the new president, or let's say re-elected president, assumes office, right? But this is actually a pretty good segment of the bill, because it puts a cap on the out-of-pocket prescription drug costs up to $2,000. So people on Medicare are going to benefit from the fact that, hey, you cannot charges more than $2,000 out of pocket in total. That means for all prescription drugs that they take. That's a big one. Another big one is that there's another 3-year extension on healthcare subsidies in the Affordable Care Act, originally passed in a pandemic relief last year, estimated by the government to have kept premiums at $10 per month or lower for the vast majority of people covered through the federal health insurance exchange. So in other words, anybody who's participating into the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare, will be able to take advantage of this benefit. This was something that was supposed to be renewed indefinitely, but again, with all the for the Democrats to keep everybody together in this bill, it was like either leave this to take effect only for 3 more years or not have it at all. So I guess you take what you can have, essentially, if you're a Democratic politician in the Senate in this case. You may ask yourself, okay, why aren't these things like made universal? Why aren't I getting the benefits immediately? It's a twofold answer, right? On the one hand, you have a divided Senate, 50-50. Another big thing is industry lobbying. So that means members or lobbyers of the pharmaceutical industry, which generally are former politicians, right? The revolving door. That's what I mentioned in a previous video. They will lobby in favor or against a specific provision in the bill. So let's say, for example, the provision in the bill that was struck down by the Senate, which was capping the price of insulin to, I think it was around $100 a month or something like that. That provision was eliminated specifically because there was a lobbying group that was trying to lobby hard against that provision, because that insulin is very popular and very profitable for pharmaceutical companies. Right or wrong, I'll leave you to decide. The donors for these candidates are actually large corporations or very wealthy individuals that profit from the status quo, right? So the tendency of everything in politics is to keep the status quo. That's why you see so many politicians eager to just vote down any measure that would be good for the average American, because essentially the goal of like politicians in general, or what politicians respond to, it's not the everyday American. It is the everyday corporation that shells out as much money as possible, right? If you have money, you have the attention of politicians. Of course, there are exceptions. Let's say Bernie Sanders, AOC, etc. They have their own interests. They have their own specific group set in constituency, right? They don't respond to everybody. But their interest groups are not necessarily, they don't necessarily surround money. But they fall in line at the end of the day to what the party line decides, right? To whoever they caucus with. So that was the drug or prescription drug segment of the bill. The other segment of the bill, the big one that was touted ahead, is the tax provision of the bill, right? Because one big reason why Manchin supported the bill is because it was quote unquote paid for. There was a 15 minimum tax for corporations making $1 billion or more in income, bringing in more than $300 billion in revenue. So in other words, this specific tax will only apply to corporations such as Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, etc. Those types of corporations will be the ones paying that type of tax. And it's only after they make $1 billion or more. So that means whatever it is that they write off, like for example, the most infamous case is Amazon last year that was able to write off all of its, like a lot of expenses and essentially not pay any federal taxes. I actually support this side of the like this element of the bill, because I do think that corporations should pay a minimum tax, like big profitable corporations, like they have tons and tons of money. Like, why can't they do that? The big segment of the bill that was cut because Kristen Sinema was against it, again because her donors lobbied against it, was the carried interest loophole, which is a loophole in the tax system that benefits private hedge funds. So like Vanguard or BlackRock. What I understand from the carried interest loophole is that it would have removed the ability for those private entities to be able to write off expenses against their taxes, right? So, but the big one that was added, because the other one not as important because it's not added in the bill, instead of that carried interest loophole being removed, there was a specific 1% tax on stock buybacks on those corporations. So in addition to the 15%, that tax. I think this is wonderful. I think corporations shouldn't be able to do stock buybacks. Essentially, sort of like hinders innovation, right? If you're Apple or if you're Microsoft and you're a gigantic tech corporation, if you're Google, you're a gigantic tech corporations, instead of buying your own stock back, you should be investing it in research and development, right? That's my own personal opinion. If you disagree or you agree, please leave it down in the comments. The other big provision, this is the last provision in the bill, the one that the reason they call it a climate, health, and tax bill is also because of the climate section. There are about $300 billion reserved for climate-based incentives. So if you buy an electric vehicle, for example, you will get around a $7,000 tax credit. If you put solar panels on your roof, or if you make your house very climate neutral, that means you have renewable energy, you get tax incentives for that, tax credits for that, which makes it a hell of a lot cheaper to sort of get into renewable energy. So this is basically the big summary of the Inflation Reduction Act. As you can see, it's not really about inflation. It doesn't really reduce inflation. It does reduce prescription drug prices on specific things. It does reduce the cost of renewable energy elements, right? But overall inflation, not necessarily, maybe on the margins. I think the reason this passed was because the Democrats felt like, oh, we need to pass a couple of things. The midterms are coming up and we're losing in the House. So this was kind of rang a couple of alarm bells. But also because they saw that they have a pretty good shot in the Senate. According to 538, they have a 60% shot at the Senate. So don't think for 1 second that this was done with the intent of helping the American people. This was done in preservation of power, right? That's in my opinion, but I think that's the more nihilistic opinion is usually the correct one in this instance. Thank you so much for watching, though. If you want me to make more of these videos, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, leave comments below about anything that you thought was interesting, anything that angered you. If you disagree with me, I would prefer it because I like disagreement and I want to see those things. And share it with your friends. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys next time.